The Millionaire CEO closed the merger. She opened a time capsule addressed to Dad, and the room stopped. It's for my dad. The fifth-grade classroom falls silent. Parents shift uncomfortably in their folding chairs. Teachers exchange glances. And Raina Carter feels her world collapse into a single point of unbearable pressure. Her son, Jonah, stands at the front of the room, small fingers clutching a blue envelope. His voice, usually bright with curiosity, has dropped to a whisper that somehow fills the entire space. It's for him, in case he ever wants to know me. The time capsule sits open on a table decorated with children's artwork. Jonah takes a step toward it, then another. His hands tremble. The envelope slips, slides across the polished floor, and comes to rest at Raina's feet. She bends to pick it up, movements mechanical, lungs refusing to work. And there, in her son's uneven handwriting, are two words that shatter 11 years of careful silence. To Dad. Raina's fingers hover over the seal. She shouldn't open it. This is Jonah's private message to a father who doesn't know he exists. But something in her son's expression, hope mixed with resignation, longing wrapped in quiet dignity, breaks the last of her resistance. The envelope tears. Inside is a drawing of a tall man with broad shoulders, dark hair, and unmistakable green eyes. Eyes that match the man whose face has dominated every financial news broadcast today. Eyes that belong to Grayson Vale, billionaire CEO, who just closed the most anticipated merger of the decade. Beneath the drawing, in careful letters, Jonah has written, "Even if I never meet you, I hope you're proud of me." The room stops breathing. And Raina knows, with devastating clarity, that the life she built to protect her son from rejection has instead filled him with questions she can no longer avoid answering. Some truths, no matter how carefully buried, are meant to be found. 11 years earlier, Raina Carter's life looked nothing like it does now. Her wardrobe consisted of tailored blazers instead of paint-stained sweaters. Her apartment overlooked the city skyline rather than a community playground. Her days were filled with financial projections and corporate strategy meetings instead of art classes and parent-teacher conferences. She was 26, ambitious, and quietly making her mark as a junior analyst at Vale Investments. Not at the top, not yet, but climbing steadily with the determined focus that characterized everything she did. Then she met Grayson Vale. Not in a dramatic collision of coffee cups or a chance elevator encounter, the way romance novels might suggest. Their meeting was ordinary, a late-night strategy session where she was the most junior person in the room, tasked with presenting market analysis to the executive team. These projections seem conservative, Grayson had said, green eyes scanning her report with the intensity that made him legendary in financial circles. "Walk me through your reasoning." Most junior analysts would have backpedaled, apologized, adjusted their numbers to please the CEO. Raina didn't. She stood her ground, explained her methodology, and defended her conclusions with quiet confidence. "The market is overheated," she'd said. "These numbers reflect reality, not optimism." The room had gone silent, senior executives exchanging nervous glances. But Grayson's expression had shifted from skepticism to interest. "Everyone else out," he'd said suddenly. "Ms. Carter stays." For 3 hours, they debated market trends, investment strategies, and risk assessments. He challenged her thinking. She pushed back on his assumptions. By midnight, they developed an entirely new approach to the Henderson portfolio, one that would later be credited with saving the firm millions during the market correction Raina had predicted. As they gathered their papers, Grayson had looked at her differently. Not as a junior analyst. Not as a subordinate. But as someone who had earned his respect. "Have dinner with me tomorrow," he'd said. Not a question. Not quite a command. Something in between. "That would be inappropriate," Raina had replied, though her heart raced at the invitation. "Probably," he'd agreed with a slight smile. "But I'd like to continue our conversation without the corporate hierarchy getting in the way." She should have said no. Office relationships were complicated enough without the power imbalance between a CEO and a junior analyst. But there was something in Grayson's eyes. A rare combination of brilliance and loneliness, power and vulnerability, that resonated with her own carefully hidden complexities. One dinner, she'd conceded. As colleagues. That one dinner became 2, then 3, then weekend brunches and late-night conversations that had nothing to do with market trends or investment strategies. They kept their relationship private. Not because it violated company policy, but because Grayson guarded his personal life with the same intensity he applied to corporate takeovers. "The world gets enough of me," he'd explained one night, as they sat on his penthouse balcony watching the city lights below. "I need something that's just mine." Raina understood. She'd grown up watching her mother chase men who treated relationships like business acquisitions. Investments to be leveraged, then liquidated when more profitable opportunities arose. Raina had promised herself she'd never become a trophy or a transaction. With Grayson, despite his wealth and power, she felt seen for her mind, valued for her perspective. For 8 months, they created a world between them, one where the billionaire CEO and the junior analyst could simply be Grayson and Raina. They never defined what they were building. Never labeled it. Never discussed the future. It existed in a delicate bubble, separate from the corporate machinery that consumed most of their waking hours. Until the Westridge deal. If you're already feeling the weight of this story, take a moment to like and subscribe. We bring you narratives that explore the complicated intersections of love, ambition, and the choices that shape our lives. The Westridge Corporation had been Grayson's white whale, a family-controlled conglomerate he'd been trying to acquire for years. When rumors of a hostile takeover attempt by a competitor emerged, Grayson disappeared into 18-hour strategy sessions. Their dinners were cancelled. Their weekend conversations reduced to brief text messages. Raina understood. This was his company, his legacy, his responsibility to shareholders and employees. She waited patiently, supporting from a distance, giving him the space to fight the battle that consumed him. When the crisis finally passed, Grayson successfully fending off the hostile bid and securing an exclusive negotiation window with Westridge, Raina expected things to return to normal. Instead, she received a text asking her to come to his penthouse that evening. She arrived to find him standing at the window, silhouetted against the city lights, a glass of scotch in his hand. He didn't turn when she entered. "The board wants me to relocate to London," he said without preamble. "Temporarily. 6 months, maybe a year. To oversee the Westridge integration personally." "That makes sense," Raina replied, keeping her voice neutral despite the sudden hollowness in her chest. "It's a complex acquisition. I'll be announcing a major restructuring tomorrow. New leadership team. New strategic direction." He finally turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "I need to be completely focused. No distractions." The word hung between them. Distractions. As if what they'd built together was equivalent to a poorly timed phone call or an unnecessary meeting. "I see," Raina said quietly. "This isn't personal," Grayson continued, his voice taking on the same tone he used in board meetings. "It's about priorities. The next year will determine the future of Vale investments for decades to come. I can't divide my attention." Raina could have argued. Could have pointed out that relationships weren't distractions but foundations. Could have asked why he assumed she would demand attention rather than offer support. Could have reminded him that even CEOs needed human connection. But she didn't. Because in that moment, looking at Grayson Vale, the man she'd grown to love standing in his perfect penthouse with his perfect view and his perfect certainty, Raina recognized the truth. She would always be secondary to his ambition. Not because he didn't care for her, but because he didn't know how to care for anything more than the empire he was building. "I understand," she said simply. "Good luck in London." She left his penthouse that night with her dignity intact and her heart in pieces. The next morning, she submitted her resignation. Not out of spite or drama, but because she knew herself well enough to recognize she couldn't stay and watch him move through the office as if they'd never shared anything beyond professional courtesy. 2 weeks later, as Grayson boarded his private jet to London, Raina sat in her bathroom staring at 2 pink lines on a pregnancy test. And made the decision that would shape the next 11 years of her life. She wouldn't tell him. Not because she wanted to punish him. Not because she didn't believe he had a right to know. But because she refused to be an obligation to a man who had already made it clear where his priorities lay. Refused to watch her child become a scheduling inconvenience, a responsibility managed by assistants and nannies while Grayson built his empire. Refused to hear her child ask why daddy never had time for school plays or birthday parties or ordinary Tuesday dinners. So Raina disappeared. Not dramatically. Not completely. She simply stepped out of the financial world and into a quieter life where billionaires and mergers and corporate takeovers existed only in news headlines she no longer bothered to read. She moved to a smaller city. Found work at a community arts center. Created a life centered around the child growing inside her rather than the career she'd once pursued with single-minded focus. Raina Carter was born on a rainy Tuesday morning in April. 7 pounds, 4 ounces. A shock of dark hair. And eyes, when they finally opened, the exact shade of green that haunted Raina's dreams. He's perfect, the nurse had said, placing him in Raina's arms. And he was. Perfect and terrifying and completely dependent on her alone. The early years were a blur of exhaustion and joy, financial stress and overwhelming love. Raina worked multiple jobs. Learned to function on minimal sleep. Became expert at stretching dollars and finding free activities to fill Jonah's days. Her mother helped when she could, but her health was fragile, her own finances limited. Raina never regretted her decision. Not when she sat in pediatrician waiting rooms surrounded by couples sharing the burden. Not when she worked night shifts while a neighbor watched her sleeping son. Not when she calculated and recalculated budgets to make sure there was enough for his needs. Jonah was worth every sacrifice. Every struggle. Every moment of bone-deep fatigue. And he was a remarkable child. Thoughtful. Curious. Gentle in a way that seemed almost old-fashioned. He asked questions about everything, how clouds formed, why leaves changed colors, what made buildings stand up. He drew constantly, filled notebooks with sketches and observations, created entire worlds with crayons and construction paper. By the time he started school, it was clear he had inherited his father's intelligence and his mother's empathy. A combination that made teachers adore him and classmates gravitate toward his quiet confidence. The father questions began when Jonah was 6. "Where's my dad?" he'd asked one night as Raina tucked him into bed. She prepared for this moment. Had rehearsed answers that were age-appropriate, honest without being hurtful, explanatory without being accusatory. "Your dad and I loved each other for a while," she'd said carefully. "But sometimes grown-ups want different things from life. He wanted to focus on his work, and I wanted to focus on being a mom. Does he know about me?" The question she dreaded most. The one that forced her to either lie directly or admit to a choice that Jonah might someday view as theft, of opportunity, of relationship, of paternal love. "No, sweetheart," she'd answered, choosing truth over comfort. "He doesn't know about you." "Why not?" "Because sometimes adults make complicated decisions that they think are best at the time." She'd stroked his hair, so like his father's. "I wanted to give you a stable life where you always knew you were the most important person to me. I was afraid that wouldn't be possible if he was involved." "Could we tell him now?" Raina had hesitated. "It's not that simple, Jonah. Your dad lives very far away. He has a very important job and a very busy life. But if he knew about me, maybe he'd want to meet me." The hope in his voice had nearly broken her. Maybe someday, she'd said, unable to crush that hope entirely. When you're older. What's his name? Another question she'd anticipated but still wasn't prepared to answer. I think that's enough for tonight, she deflected. It's getting late. Jonah had accepted the boundary then, but the questions continued over the years. Sporadic but persistent. Each time revealing a little more of the hole in his heart that Raina couldn't fill, no matter how much love she poured into him. She told him stories about his father, carefully edited versions of the truth. How smart he was. How determined. How he could solve problems no one else could figure out. She never mentioned his name, his wealth, or the specific nature of his work. Never showed Jonah pictures or news articles or the occasional magazine covers featuring Grayson's ascent in the financial world. Your dad would have loved you, she always concluded these stories. It was the one truth she could offer without reservation. Because despite everything, she believed it. Believed that if Grayson had known about Jonah, really known him, not just the abstract concept of a child, he would have loved this extraordinary boy with the same intensity he applied to everything that mattered to him. The problem was, Grayson Vale had never given himself the chance to discover what truly mattered. If this story of hidden truths and difficult choices resonates with you, please comment below. We'd love to hear your thoughts on Raina's decision and what you think might happen when these long-separated worlds finally collide. By the time Jonah reached 5th grade, the questions about his father had become less frequent but more specific. No longer satisfied with vague descriptions and hypothetical scenarios, he wanted concrete details. What did his father look like? Where exactly did he live? What was his favorite food, his favorite color, his favorite book? Raina answered what she could without revealing too much. Showed Jonah a single photo, Grayson in profile at a company event, his face partially obscured, nothing that would be immediately recognizable if Jonah ever happened to see a current image of the billionaire. You have his eyes, she told him. And his focus when you're working on something that interests you. Jonah had studied the photo intently, tracing his father's outline with a small finger. Do you think he ever wonders about me? The question caught Raina off guard. He doesn't know about you, sweetheart. But maybe he wonders if he has a kid somewhere, Jonah persisted. Maybe he feels like something's missing but doesn't know what it is. The romantic notion surprised her, this logical, fact-oriented child suddenly expressing such a fanciful thought. But it revealed something important. Jonah wasn't just curious about his father. He wanted his father to be curious about him. Wanted to be missed by someone who didn't even know he existed. It was this conversation that haunted Raina when Jonah's teacher announced the 5th grade time capsule project. Each student will contribute something meaningful to our class time capsule, Mrs. Winters explained at the parent information night. A letter, a small object, a drawing. Something that represents what they want their future selves or others to know about them at this moment in their lives. The capsule would be sealed during a special ceremony at the end of the school year, then reopened when the students graduated high school. Parents were encouraged to attend both events, the sealing now and the opening 7 years in the future. It's a wonderful opportunity for reflection, Mrs. Winters continued. And a powerful way for children to connect their present selves to their future possibilities. Raina thought it sounded lovely. A chance for Jonah to capture this moment of transition between childhood and adolescence. To preserve something of his 10-year-old self for his 17-year-old future. She didn't anticipate how seriously Jonah would take the assignment. Or how secretive he would become about his contribution. What are you planning to put in the time capsule? She asked casually over dinner the week the project was announced. Jonah shrugged, pushing pasta around his plate. I'm still thinking about it. It could be anything you want. Maybe one of your drawings. Or a letter about what you hope to be when you grow up. Maybe, he said non-committally. I'll figure it out. But as the weeks passed, Raina noticed Jonah spending hours in his room with the door closed. Heard the scratch of pencils, the rustle of paper, the occasional frustrated sigh followed by the crumple of discarded attempts. Whatever he was creating for the time capsule, it clearly mattered to him deeply. "Can I see what you're working on?" she asked one evening, bringing him a snack as he hunched over his desk. Jonah quickly covered his paper with his arm. "It's not ready yet. I might be able to help." "No," he said, more firmly than his usually gentle demeanor typically allowed. "It's private, Mom." Raina backed off, respecting his boundaries while wondering what could be so personal he couldn't share it with her. They'd always been close, necessarily so, given it had been just the two of them against the world for his entire life. This new secrecy felt significant. Worrying. A week before the ceremony, she found him at the kitchen table late at night, carefully addressing a small blue envelope. "Finished your project?" she asked, trying to sound casual. Jonah nodded, sliding the envelope into his backpack before she could see what he'd written. "Yeah. It's done. Want to tell me about it?" He hesitated, chewing his lower lip, a habit he'd had since toddlerhood when considering something important. "It's a letter," he finally said. "For someone special. For your future self." Another hesitation. "No. For someone else." Raina felt a flutter of unease. "Who?" Jonah met her eyes briefly, then looked away. "You'll see at the ceremony." The morning of the time capsule event dawned bright and clear. Raina took the day off work, wanting to be fully present for this milestone in Jonah's life. She made his favorite breakfast, blueberry pancakes with real maple syrup, a luxury they usually reserved for birthdays and special achievements. Watched him dress with unusual care in his best jeans and the button-down shirt they'd found at the thrift store, only slightly too large for his slender frame. "You look handsome," she told him, smoothing a cowlick at the back of his head. "Mom," he protested, ducking away with the self-consciousness of a child on the cusp of adolescence. But she caught his small smile, pleased despite himself. As they drove to school, Raina noticed Jonah's backpack on his lap, his hands clutching it tightly. "Nervous about today?" she asked. "A little," he admitted. What if people think my letter is stupid?" "They won't," she assured him. "And even if someone doesn't understand it, that doesn't make it any less important or meaningful." Jonah nodded, but his knuckles remained white around the straps of his backpack. What Raina couldn't know, was that across the city, in a gleaming skyscraper with his name on the side, Grayson Vale was preparing for a very different kind of milestone. After years of negotiation, strategic maneuvering, and financial chess, the Vale Meridian merger was finally closing. The deal that would cement Grayson's legacy, transform the financial landscape, and create the largest investment firm in the Northern Hemisphere. The morning had begun with champagne in the boardroom. Handshakes. Congratulatory slaps on the back. Financial journalists clamoring for quotes and photographs. Grayson moved through it all with practiced ease, confident, commanding, completely in control. No one saw the emptiness behind his smile. The hollow space that success, no matter how monumental, never quite managed to fill. At 45, Grayson Vale had everything he'd ever worked for. Global influence. Unimaginable wealth. The respect, and fear, of the entire financial world. His face appeared regularly on magazine covers. His name was mentioned in the same breath as legendary business titans. He'd built exactly the empire he'd envisioned when he founded Vale Investments 20 years earlier. And he'd sacrificed everything else to do it. 3 failed marriages, each shorter than the last. No children. No real friends, only associates, competitors, and people who wanted something from him. His parents had died years ago, his father never quite forgiving him for choosing business over the family medical practice. His brother lived abroad, their relationship reduced to perfunctory holiday calls and occasional emails. Grayson had everything and nothing. A truth he acknowledged only in rare moments of clarity, usually late at night in empty hotel rooms or on long flights between cities that had begun to blur together. The markets are responding exactly as we predicted, his CFO reported, interrupting these uncomfortable thoughts. Stocks up 12% already. Could hit 15 by closing bell. Good, Grayson replied automatically. Make sure the PR team emphasizes the job creation aspects in the afternoon briefing. I want the focus on growth, not consolidation. Already handled. The press is eating it up. You're trending on every financial news site and social platform. Grayson nodded, already moving on to the next item requiring his attention. This was what he excelled at, the constant forward motion, the relentless focus on what came next rather than what had been left behind. He didn't allow himself to think about the roads not taken. The possibilities abandoned for the sake of ambition. The people discarded along the way. People like Raina Carter. A name he hadn't allowed himself to consider in years. A memory carefully filed away with other casualties of his climb to the top. Sometimes, in unguarded moments, he wondered what had happened to her after she left Vale Investments. Whether she'd found success elsewhere. Whether she'd found happiness, the kind that had always eluded him despite all his achievements. But today was not a day for such reflections. Today was about the merger. The victory. The culmination of everything he'd worked toward. Everything he'd sacrificed for. If you're captivated by these parallel lives about to collide, hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. The most powerful stories are those where past decisions create present consequences, and we're just getting started. The 5th grade classroom buzzed with excitement. Parents filled the rows of chairs at the back, smartphones ready to capture the moment. Teachers moved efficiently around the room, organizing the children and preparing the gleaming metal time capsule that sat on a table at the front. Jonah sat with his classmates, the blue envelope clutched in his hands. Raina watched him from her seat, noting the tension in his small shoulders, the way he kept glancing toward the door as if expecting someone to arrive. Mrs. Winters called the room to attention. Welcome, parents and family members, to our 5th grade time capsule ceremony. Today, our students will place items representing their present selves into this capsule, which will remain sealed until their high school graduation. She explained how each child would come forward, briefly describe their contribution, then place it in the capsule. The items ranged from heartfelt to humorous, letters to future selves, favorite trading cards, friendship bracelets, lists of current favorite songs and movies. Madison contributed a letter describing her dream of becoming a veterinarian. Tyler added a baseball card signed by his favorite player. Emma included a USB drive with a song she'd composed herself. With each presentation, Raina watched Jonah grow more tense. He kept looking down at his envelope, then back at the door, as if making a decision. Finally, Mrs. Winters called his name. Jonah Carter. He stood slowly, clutching the blue envelope with both hands. Walked to the front of the room with careful steps. Turned to face his classmates and the assembled parents. Raina smiled encouragingly, trying to project confidence she suddenly didn't feel. Jonah, Mrs. Winters prompted gently, would you like to tell us about your contribution to the time capsule? He looked down at the envelope. Swallowed hard. His voice, when it finally came, was barely audible. It's for my dad. The room fell silent. Raina felt her heart stutter in her chest. Mrs. Winters, clearly sensing the sudden tension, kept her voice gentle. And what have you written to your dad, Jonah? Jonah's eyes flickered to Raina, then back to the floor. It's for him, in case he ever wants to know me. Raina couldn't breathe. Couldn't move. Couldn't process what was happening. Around her, other parents shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the raw emotion of the moment but unsure how to respond. That's a very thoughtful contribution, Mrs. Winters said, maintaining her composure. Would you like to place it in the capsule now? Jonah nodded. Took a step toward the metal box. Then another. His hands trembled visibly. The envelope slipped from his fingers, sliding across the polished floor until it came to rest directly at Raina's feet. Time seemed to stop as she bent to retrieve it. The classroom, the other parents, the teachers. Everything faded to background noise as Raina found herself holding the physical manifestation of her son's hidden longing. And there, on the front of the envelope in Jonah's careful handwriting, were the words that shattered 11 years of silence. To Dad. Raina shouldn't open it. This was Jonah's private message. His feelings. His right to express them however he chose. But something in his expression, a mixture of hope and resignation, longing and quiet dignity, broke through her hesitation. With fingers that didn't feel like her own, she carefully opened the seal. Inside was a drawing, rendered with the remarkable skill Jonah had been developing for years. A tall man with broad shoulders and dark hair. And eyes, green eyes that Raina would recognize anywhere. Eyes that matched those of the man whose face had dominated financial news all morning. Eyes that belonged to Grayson Vale. Beneath the drawing, in careful letters, Jonah had written, "Even if I never meet you, I hope you're proud of me." The simplicity of the message, the raw vulnerability of it, sent a physical pain through Raina's chest. Around her, she was dimly aware of other parents wiping away tears, of teachers looking anywhere but at the unfolding scene, of Jonah standing frozen at the front of the room, waiting for her reaction. In that moment, the carefully constructed walls between Raina's past and present collapsed entirely. The truth she'd been avoiding for 11 years stood before her in the form of a 10-year-old boy who wanted nothing more than to be known by the father who had never been given the chance to know him. She had told herself she was protecting Jonah from rejection. From being a footnote in a billionaire's schedule. From feeling less important than mergers and acquisitions and global finance. But looking at her son now, brave and vulnerable and hoping against hope, Raina realized she had also been protecting herself. From having to share Jonah with someone who might not value him the way she did. From having to re-enter a world she deliberately left behind. From having to face Grayson Vale and the choices they had both made. Mom. Jonah's voice broke through her thoughts. Small. Uncertain. Are you mad? Raina shook her head, unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. She stood, still holding the drawing, and crossed to where Jonah stood. Knelt before him so they were eye to eye. I'm not mad, she managed finally. This is beautiful, Jonah. Really beautiful. I just wanted him to have something, Jonah explained, his voice barely a whisper. Even if he never knows about me. Something that shows I'm real. The words broke something open inside Raina, a dam of emotion she'd been holding back for years. Because Jonah was real. So real and so precious and so deserving of being known by both his parents. She had made a choice 11 years ago based on who Grayson was then, who she was then, what she believed was best for a child who existed only as a possibility. But that child was now a person, complex, thoughtful, hurting in ways she couldn't heal alone. I think, she said carefully, that maybe it's time your dad did know about you. Jonah's eyes widened. Really? Really? Raina took a deep breath, steadying herself for what came next. But this drawing is too special to leave in a time capsule for 7 years. I think we should make a copy for that, and give the original to your father in person. The hope that bloomed across Jonah's face was almost too much to bear, pure and powerful and terrifying in its intensity. You know where he is? You know how to find him? Raina nodded, the decision crystallizing even as she spoke. Yes. I know exactly where to find him. What she didn't say, couldn't say in that moment, was that finding Grayson Vale would be the easy part. The hard part would be facing him after 11 years of silence. Explaining why she'd kept his son a secret. Preparing Jonah for the possibility that the father he'd imagined might not match the reality of a man who had built his life around achievement rather than connection. But looking at her son's drawing, at the careful detail, the hope embedded in every pencil stroke, Raina knew the time for protection was over. The time for truth had arrived. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. Some truths, once spoken, change everything that follows. Some moments define the boundary between before and after with absolute clarity. This was such a moment. As Mrs. Winters gently suggested they continue the ceremony, as other children presented their contributions, as the routine of the school day reasserted itself, Raina sat with the knowledge that nothing would ever be the same again. Because somewhere across the city, celebrating the biggest business triumph of his career, was a man who had no idea that the most important part of his legacy wasn't a merger or a stock price or a corporate empire. It was a 10-year-old boy with his eyes and his intelligence and his determination. A boy who had just set in motion a collision between past and present that neither Raina nor Grayson was prepared for. If this emotional turning point has touched your heart, please share this video with others who understand that family connections run deeper than any secret we try to keep. Your shares help stories like this reach those who need them most. The rest of the school day passed in a blur for Raina. She sat through the remainder of the ceremony, applauded at appropriate moments, smiled when other parents caught her eye. But her mind was elsewhere. Racing through possibilities, consequences, scenarios she deliberately avoided considering for 11 years. After the ceremony, Mrs. Winters approached her quietly. "Raina, if you and Jonah need some time, he's welcome to leave early today." The kindness in the teacher's eyes made it clear she understood at least part of what had transpired. Raina nodded gratefully. "Thank you. I think that might be best." Jonah was subdued as they walked to the car, his earlier emotion replaced by a watchful uncertainty. He waited until they were driving away from the school before asking the question Raina knew was coming. "Are we really going to find my dad?" Raina glanced at him, then back at the road. "Yes. But Jonah, I need you to understand something important. Your father doesn't know about you. Finding out he has a 10-year-old son will be a huge shock for him." "Because you never told him," Jonah said. Not accusatory, just stating a fact. "Yes. Because I never told him." "Why not?" The question was direct, unavoidable. Raina sighed. "It's complicated, sweetheart. When I found out I was pregnant with you, your father and I had already separated. He was moving to London for work. He had made it very clear that his career was his priority. But I was his son. A son he didn't know existed," Raina clarified gently. "I made a choice based on what I thought was best for you. I wanted you to grow up feeling secure and loved and prioritized. I was afraid that wouldn't happen if your father was involved. Because he was too busy. Because his work always came first. Always." Raina chose her next words carefully. "I didn't want you to grow up feeling like you were competing for his attention. Like you were less important than his job." Jonah was quiet for a long moment, processing this. "But maybe he would have changed. If he knew about me." The simple statement hit Raina with unexpected force. Because it was the question she'd never allowed herself to fully consider. Would Grayson have changed if he'd known about Jonah? Would fatherhood have shifted his priorities in ways she hadn't given him the chance to discover? Maybe, she acknowledged. "I don't know. And that's part of why we're doing this now. Because you deserve the chance to know your father, and he deserves the chance to know you." "What's his name?" Jonah asked. "You never told me his name." Raina took a deep breath. "Grayson. Grayson Vale." "Grayson," Jonah repeated, testing the name. "Does he live near here?" "He has offices here," Raina explained. "His company is called Vale Investments. It's very large and very successful." "Is he rich?" The question made Raina smile despite everything. Trust a 10-year-old to cut straight to what seemed most relevant. "Yes, Jonah. He's very rich." Jonah's eyes widened. Like, millionaire rich? Billionaire rich, Raina corrected, watching her son try to process this information. Whoa. Jonah fell silent again, staring out the window as they drove. Then, in a smaller voice, if he's that rich and important, why would he want to meet me? The question broke Raina's heart. Because you're his son. Because you're smart and kind and talented. Because knowing you is a privilege that has nothing to do with money or business or any of that. But what if he doesn't want to meet me? What if he's mad that you never told him? These were the questions Raina had been asking herself since the moment she'd opened that blue envelope. He might be upset with me, she acknowledged. He has a right to be. But that doesn't mean he won't want to know you. How are we going to tell him? Another question Raina had been turning over in her mind. She couldn't simply show up at Vale Investments with Jonah in tow. Couldn't ambush Grayson with this life-altering revelation in the middle of his corporate headquarters. Especially not today, when he'd be surrounded by executives and journalists celebrating the merger. I'm going to contact him first, she said. Explain the situation. Ask for a meeting. When? Soon. Raina made a decision. Today, actually. But first, let's go home. We both need some time to think about this. At their modest townhouse, Jonah retreated to his room while Raina sat at the kitchen table, staring at her phone. How exactly did one inform a billionaire CEO that he had a 10-year-old son he'd never known about? There was no protocol for this. No etiquette guide. No template to follow. She couldn't call Vale Investments directly. Grayson would be insulated by layers of assistants and gatekeepers. Couldn't send an email that might be filtered or ignored. Couldn't show up in person without an appointment. But she did have one direct connection, a phone number Grayson had given her years ago. His private line, reserved for family and emergencies. She'd never deleted it, though she'd never used it either. Had kept it stored in her contacts under a simple G, a digital ghost of the relationship they'd once shared. Would it still work after all these years? Would he still have the same number? Would he even remember who she was if she called? Only one way to find out. With trembling fingers, Raina dialed the number. Listened to it ring once, twice, 3 times. Was about to hang up when the line connected. Vale. His voice was exactly as she remembered, deep, authoritative, slightly impatient. Raina's throat closed. No words came. Hello. Grayson said, more sharply. Who is this? It's Raina, she managed finally. Raina Carter. The silence that followed seemed to stretch for an eternity. When Grayson spoke again, his tone had changed completely. Raina. Just her name, but loaded with surprise and something else she couldn't identify. It's been a long time. 11 years, she confirmed. I saw your name on my caller ID and thought it must be a mistake. A pause. Are you all right? The question surprised her, his immediate concern rather than confusion or suspicion. I'm fine. But I need to speak with you. In person. It's important. Another pause. She could almost hear him calculating, assessing, trying to determine what could possibly warrant this call after so many years of silence. I'm in the middle of something significant right now, he said finally. The Vale Meridian merger closed this morning. I know, Raina replied, though she hadn't until that moment. Congratulations. But this can't wait, Grayson. It's about something that will change your life. That sounds ominous. His tone shifted to something more guarded. What exactly is this about, Raina? She took a deep breath. It's not something I can explain over the phone. Please. I need 30 minutes of your time. Today if possible. The silence stretched again. She could imagine him checking his calendar, weighing the interruption against his curiosity, calculating the risk of agreeing versus refusing. I have a celebration dinner with the board at 8, he said finally. I could meet you at 6. My office. Not your office, Raina countered quickly. Somewhere private. And I'll be bringing someone with me. Someone? Now his voice held definite suspicion. Who? Raina closed her eyes. My son. The word hung between them, heavy with implication. She heard Grayson's sharp intake of breath, the momentary silence that followed as he processed what she wasn't saying directly. How old is your son, Raina? His voice was carefully controlled now, each word precise. He's 10. Another silence, longer this time. She could almost hear him doing the math, connecting the timing to their relationship, to her abrupt departure from his life. I see. Just 2 words, but they contained volumes. Text me your address. I'll send a car at 5:30. We'll meet at my residence. Before she could respond, the line went dead. Raina sat at the kitchen table, phone still in hand, heart pounding. It was done. The first step taken. No turning back now. She found Jonah in his room, sitting on his bed, staring at the framed photo of the two of them at the beach last summer. He looked up when she entered. Did you call him? Raina nodded. Yes. We're meeting him this evening. Jonah's eyes widened. Today? We're meeting him today. At his home. A car will pick us up at 5:30. What did he say? Was he mad? Did you tell him about me? Raina sat beside her son, putting an arm around his thin shoulders. I told him I was bringing my son. I think he figured out the rest. Was he happy? The hope in Jonah's voice was almost unbearable. He was surprised, Raina said carefully. This is a huge shock for him, Jonah. We need to give him time to process it. Jonah nodded, but his expression remained anxious. What should I wear? What should I bring? Should I take my drawing? Definitely bring your drawing. And wear whatever makes you comfortable. This isn't about impressing him, sweetheart. It's about him getting to know the real you. As Jonah began sorting through his closet with unusual care, Raina slipped out to her own room. Sat on the edge of her bed, trying to steady her breathing, to calm the storm of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. In a few hours, she would face Grayson Vale for the first time in 11 years. Would watch him meet the son he never knew existed. Would have to explain choices she'd made when she was younger, more afraid, more determined to protect herself and her child from potential rejection. Would have to face the possibility that she'd been wrong. That Grayson might have been a better father than she'd given him credit for. That her decision, however well-intentioned, had deprived both Jonah and Grayson of a relationship they might have treasured. The weight of it all pressed down on her, making it difficult to breathe. But beneath the anxiety and uncertainty was something else, a sense of rightness. Of long overdue truth finally finding its way to the surface. Because some secrets aren't meant to be kept forever. Some truths demand to be acknowledged, no matter how complicated or painful. Some connections, like that between a father and son, deserve the chance to exist, even if that chance comes years later than it should have. At precisely 5:30, a sleek black car pulled up outside their townhouse. Raina and Jonah stood on the porch, both dressed in their best clothes, both vibrating with nervous energy. Ready? Raina asked, squeezing Jonah's hand. He nodded, clutching his drawing in its protective folder. Ready. The driver opened the door for them, his expression professionally neutral. Ms. Carter. Mr. Vale is expecting you. If you're feeling the weight of this moment, the courage it takes to face long-buried truths and the hope that honesty might heal what silence has broken, please take a moment to like and subscribe. Your support helps us continue sharing stories that remind us it's never too late to right a wrong or bridge a divide. Grayson Vale's residence was exactly what Raina had expected, a penthouse atop one of the city's most exclusive buildings. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views. Minimalist furniture in shades of gray and black created an atmosphere of restrained luxury. Everything was immaculate, impersonal, more like a high-end hotel suite than a home. The elevator opened directly into the foyer. The driver had called ahead, so Grayson was waiting for them when they arrived. He stood with his back to the windows, silhouetted against the early evening sky, hands in the pockets of trousers that probably cost more than Raina's monthly rent. 11 years had changed him less than she'd expected. His dark hair showed touches of silver at the temples. Lines had deepened around his eyes and mouth. But he still radiated the same controlled power, the same intensity that had drawn her to him all those years ago. His gaze moved from Raina to Jonah, and she saw the moment of recognition, the slight widening of his eyes, the almost imperceptible intake of breath as he took in the boy with his coloring, his jawline, his unmistakable green eyes. "Raina," he said, his voice carefully neutral. Then, with a nod toward Jonah, "And this must be your son." "Our son," Raina corrected quietly. "Grayson, this is Jonah." "Jonah, this is, your father." Jonah stood frozen, staring up at the man he'd wondered about his entire life. The man he'd drawn from imagination and the single partial photograph his mother had shown him. The man whose features he saw in his own reflection every day. "Hello, Jonah," Grayson said, his voice gentler than Raina had ever heard it. "Hi," Jonah managed, barely audible. An awkward silence fell. Grayson gestured toward the living area. "Please, sit down." They moved to a seating arrangement of sleek leather sofas. Raina and Jonah on one, Grayson on another, a glass coffee table between them like a neutral zone in contested territory. "Can I offer you something to drink?" Grayson asked, the formality a thin cover for the emotional magnitude of the moment. "Water? Juice?" "We're fine," Raina answered for both of them. "Thank you." Another silence. Grayson's gaze kept returning to Jonah, studying him with an intensity that would have been uncomfortable if not for the wonder mixed with the scrutiny. "He's mine," Grayson said finally. Not a question. A statement of recognition. "Yes," Raina confirmed. "He's yours. And you never told me." Again, not a question. Just a fact, stated without obvious anger but with a weight that filled the room. "No. I never told you." Grayson's focus shifted fully to Raina now, his expression unreadable. "Why?" The question she'd been preparing to answer for 11 years. The justification she'd rehearsed countless times in her mind. But now, sitting here with Jonah beside her and Grayson across from them, the carefully constructed explanation felt inadequate. "Because you made it clear that your work came first," she said finally. "Because I didn't want our child to be a footnote in your schedule. Because I was afraid." "Afraid of what?" Grayson interrupted, his voice still controlled but with an edge now. "Afraid that you wouldn't want us," Raina admitted. "Or worse, that you would feel obligated to be involved but would never truly be present. That Jonah would grow up feeling like he was competing with Vale Investments for your attention." Grayson's jaw tightened. "So you made the decision for me. Decided I wasn't capable of being a father without giving me the chance to try." "Yes," Raina acknowledged. "That's exactly what I did. And maybe it was wrong. Maybe you would have risen to the occasion. But at the time, based on what I knew of you, based on how our relationship ended, I made what I thought was the best choice for Jonah." "And what changed?" Grayson asked. "Why now, after 11 years?" Raina looked at Jonah, who had been watching this exchange with wide eyes. "Because Jonah needs to know his father. And because he made me realize that you deserve to know your son." Jonah reached into the folder he'd been clutching since they arrived. Pulled out the drawing that had set all of this in motion. Held it out toward Grayson with a trembling hand. "I made this for you," he said, his voice small but steady. "For a time capsule at school. But Mom thought you should have it now instead of waiting 7 years. Grayson took the drawing carefully. Studied the detailed portrait, his own face rendered with remarkable skill by a child who had never seen him in person. Read the words beneath, even if I never meet you, I hope you're proud of me. Something shifted in his expression. A crack in the carefully maintained facade. For a moment, just a moment, Raina glimpsed the man beneath the billionaire CEO. The human being behind the corporate legend. This is extraordinary, Grayson said finally, looking up at Jonah. You're very talented. Thanks, Jonah replied, a hint of pride breaking through his nervousness. I like to draw. And build things. And read about science. Mom says I get that from you. Your mother's right, Grayson confirmed. He set the drawing carefully on the coffee table, then leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Jonah, would you mind if I spoke with your mother alone for a few minutes? There's a media room down the hall with a pretty impressive gaming setup. You're welcome to check it out. Jonah looked to Raina for permission. She nodded, though her stomach tightened at the thought of facing Grayson without her son as a buffer. Second door on the right, Grayson directed. Take your time. When Jonah had disappeared down the hallway, Grayson turned to Raina, his expression hardening. 11 years, he said, his voice low and controlled. 11 years of his life. Gone. Birthdays. First steps. First words. All of it. You took that from me, Raina. I know, she acknowledged. And I'm sorry. Truly sorry. But I was 26 and scared and convinced you'd see our child as an inconvenience. You just told me I was a distraction from your work. Had made it clear your priorities lay elsewhere. That was about our relationship, Grayson countered. Not about a child. Not about my son. Would it really have made a difference? Raina challenged. Would you have suddenly changed everything about who you were, about what drove you, because of an unexpected pregnancy? Or would you have thrown money at the situation, hired nannies, set up trust funds, made appearances when your schedule allowed, while continuing to build Vale investments into the empire you always wanted? Grayson didn't answer immediately. His gaze shifted to the windows, to the city spread out below, the physical manifestation of everything he prioritized for the past 11 years. I don't know, he admitted finally. I'd like to think I would have been better than that. That knowing I had a son would have changed my perspective. But I can't say for certain. The honesty surprised Raina. She'd expected defensiveness, anger, accusations. Not this quiet acknowledgement of his own limitations. For what it's worth, she said softly, Jonah knows all about you. Not the specifics, not your name or your wealth or your company. But who you are as a person. Your intelligence. Your determination. Your ability to solve problems no one else can figure out. I've never spoken badly of you to him. Never made you the villain in our story. And yet you kept him from me. Yes. And that's on me. My choice. My responsibility. Raina met his gaze directly. But we're here now. And the question is, what happens next? Grayson looked toward the hallway where Jonah had disappeared. He's remarkable. Yes, he is. I want to know him, Grayson said, his voice firm. I want to be part of his life. Whatever that looks like, however we need to arrange it. I've missed 11 years. I won't miss any more. Relief washed through Raina, not because she'd expected Grayson to reject Jonah, but because the certainty in his voice confirmed what she'd always believed beneath her fears, that Grayson Vale, for all his flaws, would recognize the value of his son once he knew him. I want that too, she said. Jonah deserves to have his father in his life. We'll need to establish a formal arrangement, Grayson said, already shifting into problem-solving mode. Visitation schedule. Financial support. Legal recognition of paternity. Grayson, Raina interrupted gently. Before we get to the logistics, I think what Jonah needs most is simply to know you. To spend time with you. To understand who his father is beyond the facts I've shared with him. He paused, considering this. You're right. Of course you're right. He ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of uncertainty from a man who projected nothing but confidence to the world. I don't know how to do this, Raina. How to be a father to a 10-year-old I just met. How to make up for 11 years in a way that doesn't overwhelm him or disappoint him or. You don't have to make up for anything, Raina said. You just have to show up. Be present. Listen to him. Let him know you care about what he thinks and feels and dreams about. That sounds surprisingly straightforward. It is and it isn't. Being a parent is the simplest and most complicated thing in the world. Raina smiled slightly. But Jonah makes it easy. He's been waiting his whole life to know you. Grayson nodded, his expression solemn. I'd like to start now. Today. If that's all right with you. And with him. I think he'd like that. They called Jonah back from the media room. He returned looking slightly more relaxed, the initial shock of meeting his father beginning to fade. Jonah, Grayson began, his tone gentler than Raina had ever heard it, I'd like to get to know you better. Would you be willing to stay for dinner? All of us together. Jonah's face lit up. Really? Here. Actually, I thought we might go out, Grayson suggested. Anywhere you'd like. Jonah looked to Raina, seeking permission or guidance. She nodded encouragingly. There's a pizza place near our house, Jonah said hesitantly. They have the best cheese bread. Mom and I go there for special occasions. Grayson smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his usually serious face. Pizza sounds perfect. The restaurant was nothing like the upscale establishments Grayson typically frequented. Checkered tablecloths. Plastic menus. Families with children at most tables. The owner greeted Raina and Jonah by name, raising an eyebrow at Grayson but asking no questions. They settled into a corner booth. Ordered a large pizza with half cheese, for Jonah, and half vegetable, for the adults, plus the cheese bread Jonah had mentioned. As they waited for their food, an awkward silence fell. So, Grayson said finally, your mother tells me you like to draw. And build things. And read about science. Jonah nodded. Yeah. I'm reading a book about space right now. Did you know there are more stars in the universe than grains of sand on all the beaches on Earth? I did know that, Grayson replied. It's hard to comprehend, isn't it? The scale of it all. Mom got me a telescope for my birthday last year, Jonah continued, warming to the subject. We can see Jupiter and Saturn from our backyard. And the moon looks amazing through it. I'd love to see that sometime, Grayson said. Then, glancing at Raina, if that would be all right. Of course, she agreed. Jonah's always looking for stargazing companions. I try, but I fall asleep if we're out there too long. Mom says I get my interest in science from you, Jonah said, looking at Grayson with open curiosity. What kind of science do you like? Mathematics, primarily, Grayson answered. Patterns. Systems. How numbers interact and predict outcomes. It's the foundation of what I do professionally. What exactly do you do? Jonah asked. Mom said you run a company, but she didn't explain what kind. Grayson considered how to explain his work to a 10-year-old. I help people and businesses invest their money wisely. Find opportunities for growth. Predict which companies will succeed and which might fail. So you're like, really good at math? Grayson laughed, a sound Raina realized she'd rarely heard during their relationship. Yes, I suppose that's the simplest explanation. I'm really good at math. Their food arrived, momentarily pausing the conversation. Jonah immediately reached for a piece of cheese bread, then hesitated, looking at Grayson. "You should try this," he said, pushing the basket toward his father. "It's the best part." The simple gesture, a child wanting to share something he loved with a parent he'd just met, touched Raina deeply. She watched as Grayson took a piece, bit into it, and nodded appreciatively. "You're right," he confirmed. "That is excellent cheese bread." Jonah beamed, pleased by the validation. As they ate, the conversation flowed more naturally. Jonah asked questions about Grayson's childhood, his interests outside of work, few, Raina noted, though he mentioned enjoying sailing and chess. Whether he had any pets, no, but he'd had a dog as a boy. Grayson, in turn, asked about Jonah's school, his friends, his favorite subjects. Listened with genuine interest as Jonah described his science fair project on solar energy, his position as goalkeeper on his soccer team, his collection of rocks and minerals. Raina observed the interaction with a mixture of emotions she couldn't quite untangle. Relief that Grayson was making a sincere effort. Sadness for the years of similar conversations they'd missed. Anxiety about what came next. And beneath it all, a growing certainty that she'd made the right decision in bringing them together, however belated the introduction might be. As they finished their meal, Jonah grew quieter, more thoughtful. Finally, he asked the question Raina had been expecting since they'd left Grayson's penthouse. "Are you mad that Mom never told you about me?" Grayson set down his water glass carefully. Glanced at Raina, then back at Jonah. "I was upset at first," he admitted. "I still wish things had happened differently. But I understand why your mother made the choice she did. She was trying to protect you. To give you stability and security. But now you know about me," Jonah persisted. "So what happens next?" The directness of the question, so typical of Jonah, so reminiscent of Grayson himself, hung in the air between them. "What happens next," Grayson said slowly, "is that I become part of your life. If that's what you want. We figure out how to be father and son, even though we're starting a bit later than most." "I'd like that," Jonah said quietly. Then, with the vulnerability only children can express so openly, "Will I see you a lot? Or just sometimes?" Grayson looked to Raina, clearly recognizing that this wasn't a question he could answer alone. That whatever promises he made would need her cooperation to fulfill. "We'll work out a schedule," Raina said. "Regular visits. Maybe weekends together. Whatever makes sense for all of us. And you'll come to my soccer games?" Jonah asked Grayson directly. "And my science fair next month?" "I'll be there," Grayson promised. "For all of it. Whatever's important to you is important to me." The certainty in his voice surprised Raina. This was a man whose calendar was typically booked months in advance. Whose time was allocated in carefully measured increments. Whose availability was guarded by layers of assistants and gatekeepers. Yet here he was, making promises to a 10-year-old boy without hesitation or qualification. As if nothing, not mergers or board meetings or global finance, could possibly take precedence over his son's soccer game or science fair. It was the transformation Raina had once believed impossible. The shift in priorities she'd never given Grayson the chance to make 11 years ago. As they prepared to leave the restaurant, Grayson insisted on paying the bill despite Raina's protest that it was their regular place and she usually handled it. Outside, his driver waited with the same sleek black car that had brought them to his penthouse. "May I drive you home?" Grayson asked. Raina nodded, recognizing the request for what it was, a desire to extend their time together, to see where his son lived, to glimpse the life that had been built without him. The contrast between Grayson's penthouse and their modest townhouse couldn't have been more stark. But if he noticed the peeling paint on the front door or the second-hand furniture visible through the windows, he gave no indication. His focus remained entirely on Jonah, who was suddenly eager to show his father his room, his telescope, his collection of drawings and science books. "It's getting late," Raina reminded gently. "School tomorrow." Jonah's face fell. But... Your mother's right, Grayson interjected. School is important. But perhaps I could come back tomorrow evening. If that works for both of you. Yes. Jonah's enthusiasm was immediate. Mom, can he? Please. Raina smiled at her son's excitement. Of course. Dinner is usually at 6:30. I'll be here at 6, Grayson promised. Then, to Jonah, that will give us time to set up the telescope before it gets dark. As Jonah headed inside to get ready for bed, Grayson lingered on the porch with Raina. The evening air had cooled, carrying the scent of someone's fireplace nearby. Thank you, he said quietly. For today. For bringing him to meet me. For raising him to be such an extraordinary child. He is extraordinary, Raina agreed. And he deserves to know you. To have you in his life. I meant what I said to him. About being there. For everything. Grayson's expression was more open, more vulnerable than she'd ever seen it. I know my track record doesn't inspire confidence. I know you have every reason to doubt me. But I'm going to prove you wrong, Raina. I'm going to be the father he deserves. I believe you, she said, surprised to realize she meant it. I've seen how you look at him. How you listen to him. It's different from how you've ever looked at or listened to anyone else. Grayson nodded, acknowledging the truth of her observation. He changes everything. 3 simple words that encompassed a seismic shift in worldview. A reprioritization that Raina had once believed beyond Grayson's capacity. I'll see you tomorrow at 6, she said. Jonah will be counting the minutes. So will I. Grayson hesitated, then added, we have a lot to figure out. Legally. Financially. Logistically. But we'll make it work. For him. For him, Raina agreed. As Grayson's car pulled away, Raina stood on the porch for a moment longer, watching until the taillights disappeared around the corner. Then she went inside to find Jonah, already in pajamas, sitting on his bed with an expression of wonder. That was really my dad, he said, as if still trying to convince himself. And he's coming back tomorrow. Yes to both, Raina confirmed, sitting beside him. He likes me, Jonah continued, a note of surprise in his voice. He really seemed to like me. Of course he likes you, Raina said, smoothing his hair. How could he not? You're amazing. Do you think? Jonah hesitated, then pushed forward. Do you think he might love me someday? Like a real dad? The question pierced Raina's heart. I think he already does, sweetheart. He just needs time to get to know you better. To figure out how to show it. Jonah nodded, processing this. I'm glad you told him about me. Even though it took a long time. So am I, Raina said softly. So am I. As she tucked her son into bed, as she kissed his forehead and turned out his light, Raina felt a weight lifting, a burden she'd carried for 11 years finally beginning to ease. The truth was out. The door between past and present had been opened. The future, uncertain but full of possibility, stretched before them. A future where Jonah would know his father. Where Grayson would know his son. Where the time capsule letter that had started it all would be replaced by something far more valuable. A relationship built not on what might have been, but on what could still be. If this story of truth, reconciliation, and second chances has touched your heart, please take a moment to like and subscribe. Your support helps us share more stories that remind us it's never too late to right a wrong, to heal a wound, to build a bridge where once there was only distance. The next few weeks unfolded in a whirlwind of adjustments and discoveries. True to his word, Grayson arrived at their townhouse at precisely 6 o'clock the evening after their first meeting. He brought with him not extravagant gifts or grand gestures, but a book on astronomy that he and Jonah pored over together before setting up the telescope in the backyard. Raina watched from the kitchen window as father and son huddled together in the gathering darkness, Grayson's tall frame bent close to Jonah's smaller one, both of them gazing upward with identical expressions of wonder. The simple domesticity of the scene brought unexpected tears to her eyes. This was what she'd denied them both for 11 years. This natural connection. This shared curiosity. This belonging. Grayson came for dinner 3 times that week. Each visit revealed new similarities between father and son, the way they both tilted their heads when considering a problem, their shared dislike of green peppers, the focused intensity they brought to tasks that interested them. But there were differences too. Where Grayson was reserved, calculating, strategic in his thinking, Jonah was open, imaginative, willing to take creative leaps. Where Grayson approached problems with ruthless efficiency, Jonah brought patience and playfulness. They balanced each other in ways neither Raina nor Grayson had anticipated. By the end of the second week, they had established a tentative routine. Grayson would join them for dinner most evenings, arriving just as Raina finished cooking, staying through Jonah's bedtime. On weekends, he would take Jonah for longer outings, to museums, parks, occasionally to his office where Jonah was fascinated by the trading floor and the wall of screens displaying financial data from around the world. The legal and financial aspects progressed with the efficiency Raina would have expected from Grayson. A paternity test confirmed what was already visually obvious. Legal documents established Grayson's parental rights and responsibilities. A generous support arrangement was proposed, negotiated, and finalized, Grayson insisting on providing far more than Raina was comfortable accepting, Raina insisting on maintaining her financial independence. "This isn't about you or me," Grayson had said during one particularly tense discussion. "It's about giving Jonah every advantage, every opportunity." "Money isn't everything," Raina had countered. "And I don't want him growing up thinking it is." They compromised, as they were learning to do on many fronts. Grayson would cover Jonah's education, healthcare, and extracurricular activities. Would establish a trust for his future. Would provide additional support that would allow Raina to reduce her working hours and be more available for Jonah. But day-to-day expenses would remain Raina's responsibility, preserving the modest lifestyle that had shaped Jonah into the grounded, appreciative child he was. The most significant challenge wasn't financial or legal, but emotional, navigating the complex feelings that surfaced as they attempted to build a co-parenting relationship from scratch. Resentments Raina thought she'd resolved years ago resurfaced at unexpected moments. Grayson's instinct to control situations, to apply business solutions to personal matters, occasionally created friction. Both were learning to parent together without the foundation of a shared history or established trust. But at the center of it all was Jonah, thriving under the attention of both parents, blossoming in ways that made any discomfort worthwhile. His confidence grew. His natural curiosity expanded with Grayson's encouragement and resources. His smile, always quick and genuine, became even brighter. 3 weeks after their first meeting, Jonah's science fair arrived. Raina had helped him prepare his solar energy project over several weekends, constructing a small-scale model that demonstrated how different surfaces absorbed and reflected sunlight. Grayson had contributed technical advice and data analysis, showing Jonah how to create graphs that illustrated his findings. The morning of the fair, Jonah was uncharacteristically quiet as Raina helped him load his project into the car. "Nervous?" she asked, buckling her seatbelt. "A little," he admitted. Then, after a pause, "Do you think Dad will really come? He has that big meeting today." The question revealed how quickly Jonah had integrated Grayson into his concept of family. Already calling him Dad, already aware of his schedule, already concerned about where he ranked in his father's priorities. "He promised he would be there," Raina said, starting the car. "And I believe him." But as they set up Jonah's display in the school gymnasium, as other parents arrived with their children, as the judges began making their rounds, Grayson was nowhere to be seen. Raina checked her phone repeatedly. No messages. No calls. Jonah's expression grew increasingly anxious as he scanned the entrance each time the doors opened. "He's just running late," Raina assured him, though her own doubts were growing. His meeting probably went long. When the judges reached Jonah's table, he presented his project with his usual articulate enthusiasm, but Raina could see the disappointment shadowing his eyes. The judges moved on. Still no Grayson. "It's okay, Mom," Jonah said, his voice small but determined. "I know he's really busy. It's not a big deal." But it was a big deal. It was exactly the scenario Raina had feared 11 years ago, Jonah becoming a secondary priority, an obligation that could be rescheduled when more important matters arose. The very reason she'd kept him from Grayson in the first place. She was about to suggest they take a break, find a snack, when the gymnasium doors opened and Grayson strode in. Not in his usual impeccable suit, but disheveled, slightly out of breath, his tie askew and a smudge of something that looked like grease on his sleeve. Jonah's face lit up. "Dad! You came!" Grayson made his way to their table, apologizing as he approached. "I'm so sorry I'm late. There was an accident on the highway. Complete standstill. I ended up abandoning my car and running the last mile." Raina blinked, trying to process this information. Grayson Vale. Billionaire CEO, man who traveled exclusively by private car or jet, had left his vehicle on the side of the road and run to make it to an elementary school science fair. "You ran here?" Jonah asked, clearly having the same difficulty believing this scenario. "Well, jogged might be more accurate," Grayson admitted, slightly breathless. "I'm not as young as I used to be. But yes, I ran. I promised I'd be here, and I meant it." The simple statement, backed by his disheveled appearance and obvious effort, transformed something in Raina's perception of the man she'd once loved. This wasn't the Grayson who had dismissed their relationship as a distraction 11 years ago. This was someone new, someone who understood that promises to children were sacred, that showing up mattered more than conference calls or board meetings or billion-dollar deals. "Did I miss your presentation to the judges?" Grayson asked Jonah. "Yeah, but that's okay. I can show you everything now." As Jonah eagerly explained his project, as Grayson listened with genuine interest and asked thoughtful questions, Raina watched them with a growing sense of wonder. The transformation in Grayson wasn't just in his priorities but in his entire demeanor. The corporate mask had slipped, revealing the man beneath. A man capable of connection, of wonder, of putting someone else's needs before his own. A man who might, indeed, have been a good father from the beginning, if given the chance. The thought brought with it a wave of complicated emotions, regret for the years lost, relief that they'd found their way here eventually, hope for what might still be possible. When the awards were announced, Jonah receiving an honorable mention that delighted him, Grayson's pride was palpable. He insisted on taking them both to dinner to celebrate, not to one of his usual exclusive restaurants but to the ice cream parlor Jonah loved, where they sat at a sticky table eating sundaes while Jonah recounted every detail of the judge's comments. Later, after Jonah had gone to bed still buzzing with excitement, Raina and Grayson sat on the front porch, the spring evening warm enough to be comfortable. "Thank you for coming today," Raina said quietly. It meant everything to him. "I meant what I said. I promised I'd be there." Grayson looked out at the quiet street, his profile outlined by the porch light. "I've broken a lot of promises in my life, Raina. Made a lot of choices I can't undo. But I won't break promises to him. Not ever." "I believe you," she said, surprised to realize how completely she meant it. "I've seen how you are with him. How you prioritize him. It's not what I expected." Grayson turned to look at her directly. "It's not what I expected either. I thought I knew what mattered. Success. Achievement. Building something lasting. But meeting Jonah." He shook his head, searching for words. "It's like discovering there was an entire dimension of existence I didn't know about. A whole different definition of what lasting really means. The vulnerability in his voice, the raw honesty of the admission, touched something in Raina that she'd thought long buried. The part of her that had once seen beyond Grayson's wealth and power to the complex, brilliant, lonely man beneath. "I was wrong," she said softly. 11 years ago. I made assumptions about who you were, what kind of father you'd be. I didn't give you the chance to prove me wrong. And I gave you every reason to make those assumptions, Grayson countered. The way I ended things between us. The priorities I made clear. You made the best decision you could with the information you had. The generosity of his perspective surprised her. She'd expected recrimination, resentment, perhaps even legal consequences for keeping his son from him. Not this thoughtful understanding of her choices, flawed as they might have been. "Where do we go from here?" she asked. "We're figuring out how to co-parent, but there's still so much unresolved between us." Grayson was quiet for a moment, considering. "I think we start by acknowledging that we're different people now than we were 11 years ago. You're not the junior analyst finding her way in a cutthroat industry. I'm not the CEO who believed nothing mattered except the next deal, the next acquisition. And what are we now? Parents," he said simply. "Trying to do right by an extraordinary child who deserves the best of both of us. The rest, we'll figure out as we go." It wasn't a complete answer, but it was an honest one. They were in uncharted territory, navigating a relationship that had no clear precedent or roadmap. All they could do was move forward with open eyes and genuine intentions. As Grayson prepared to leave, he paused at the steps. "The company retreat is next weekend. 3 days at the lake house. I usually lead strategy sessions, team-building exercises. It's been on the calendar for months." Raina nodded, unsure where he was going with this. "I've decided not to attend," he continued. "I'm delegating it to the executive team. I'd like to take Jonah camping instead. If that's all right with you. And if he'd like to go." The statement, so casual yet so profound in what it revealed about Grayson's shifting priorities, left Raina momentarily speechless. "You're skipping your company retreat? The one you personally instituted as a cornerstone of Vale Investments culture?" Grayson shrugged, the gesture surprisingly boyish from a man usually so controlled. "The company will survive without me for one weekend. And Jonah mentioned wanting to try camping. I used to go with my grandfather when I was about his age. Some of my best memories." "You never told me that," Raina said, realizing how little she actually knew about Grayson's childhood, his formative experiences. "There's a lot we never told each other," he acknowledged. "Maybe that's part of what we need to change." As she watched him walk to his car. Not the usual chauffeured vehicle but a more modest sedan he'd started driving himself for these visits, Raina felt something shift inside her. A softening. A willingness to see Grayson not as the man who had hurt her years ago, but as the man he was becoming now. A man who would abandon his car and run a mile to make it to a science fair. A man who would skip a crucial business event to take his son camping. A man who, perhaps, deserved a second chance not just as Jonah's father, but in her life as well. If this story of transformation and redemption speaks to you, if you believe that people can change when given the right motivation and that it's never too late to become the person you were meant to be, please take a moment to like and subscribe. Your support helps us continue sharing stories that remind us of the power of forgiveness, growth, and the unexpected ways love reshapes our priorities. The camping trip marked a turning point in Jonah and Grayson's relationship. They returned sunburned, exhausted, and completely bonded, Jonah full of stories about fishing and hiking and stargazing far from city lights, Grayson looking more relaxed than Raina had ever seen him, even with mosquito bites on his arms and dirt under his usually immaculate fingernails. "Dad knows everything about constellations," Jonah reported excitedly. "And he taught me how to build a fire without matches. And we saw a deer with her baby right by our campsite." "Sounds like you had an amazing time," Raina said, smiling at her son's enthusiasm while noting his easy use of "Dad," no longer awkward or tentative, but natural, as if Grayson had always been in his life. "The best," Jonah confirmed. "Can we go again soon?" "Dad said maybe next time you could come too. We could get a bigger tent." The casual inclusion startled Raina. She glanced at Grayson, who looked slightly embarrassed. "I mentioned it might be nice to make it a family trip sometime," he explained. "If you were interested." Family trip. The phrase hung between them, loaded with implications neither was quite ready to address directly. "That sounds nice," Raina said carefully. "Maybe later in the summer." As spring turned to summer, their lives settled into a new pattern. Grayson was present not just for special occasions but for ordinary moments. Helping with homework, attending parent-teacher conferences, taking turns with school drop-offs and pickups. He rearranged his work schedule to accommodate Jonah's needs, delegated more responsibilities to his executive team, and for the first time in his career, regularly left the office before 7. The changes didn't go unnoticed in the business world. Financial publications ran speculative pieces about Grayson Vale's shifting priorities, his reduced public profile, rumors of a personal situation that had diverted his legendary focus. Some analysts predicted trouble for Vale Investments without Grayson's full attention. Others suggested the company might benefit from a more balanced leadership approach. Grayson seemed unconcerned by the speculation. "Let them talk," he told Raina when she mentioned an article she'd seen. "The company's performance speaks for itself. And even if it didn't." He shrugged. "Some things matter more." The statement would have been unimaginable from the Grayson she'd known 11 years ago. The man whose identity had been completely entwined with his corporate success, who measured his worth by market share and acquisition values. This new Grayson, the one who coached Jonah's summer soccer team despite knowing almost nothing about the sport, who attended school concerts and sat through animated movies without checking his phone once, was someone Raina was still getting to know. Someone who intrigued her, challenged her assumptions, occasionally frustrated her with his tendency to solve problems with resources rather than understanding the emotional dynamics involved. Someone she was, against her better judgment, beginning to care for again. The realization came gradually, in small moments rather than grand epiphanies. The way her pulse quickened slightly when he arrived for dinner. The lingering conversations on the porch after Jonah went to bed. The shared smiles when their son said something particularly insightful or funny. The growing ease between them as co-parents evolved into something that felt like friendship, with undercurrents neither was ready to acknowledge. Jonah, with a child's intuition, sensed the shift. "Do you still like Dad?" he asked one evening as Raina tucked him into bed. "Of course I like him," she replied carefully. "He's your father. We're friends now." Jonah gave her a look that suggested he wasn't buying this simplification. "No, I mean, do you like him like you used to? When you were together before I was born?" The directness of the question caught Raina off guard. "It's complicated, sweetheart. Your dad and I have a lot of history. We're different people now than we were then. But you smile more when he's here," Jonah persisted. "And he looks at you the way David's dad looks at his mom. Like you're something special." Raina felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Jonah. It would be okay, you know," Jonah continued, his expression serious beyond his years. "If you liked each other that way again. I think it would be good, actually." Raina smoothed his hair, buying time to compose her thoughts. "Relationships between grown-ups are complicated, sweetheart. Your dad and I are focused on being good parents to you right now. That's what matters most." "But you could do both," Jonah pointed out with a child's straightforward logic. "Be good parents and like each other too." "Maybe," Raina conceded, unwilling to dismiss his perspective entirely. "But that's not something you need to worry about. Whatever happens between your dad and me, we both love you more than anything. That won't ever change." Jonah seemed satisfied with this assurance, but his observation lingered in Raina's mind long after she'd turned out his light. Did Grayson look at her like something special? Had she been so focused on navigating their co-parenting relationship that she'd missed signals of something more? And more importantly, was she ready to risk her heart again with the man who had broken it once before? The question became more pressing as summer progressed and their lives became increasingly intertwined. Grayson was no longer just a visitor in their world but an integral part of it. He had keys to the townhouse, a drawer in the guest room for overnight stays when they returned too late from outings, a favorite mug in the kitchen cabinet, a voice in decisions about Jonah's education, activities, even his bedtime routine. They functioned, to all outward appearances, like a family, albeit one with unusual living arrangements and a complicated backstory. In late July, as Jonah's 11th birthday approached, Grayson suggested they discuss plans over dinner. Just the two of them, while Jonah was at a friend's house for a sleepover. "I thought we could do something special," he said as they sat at a quiet restaurant downtown, nicer than their usual places but not ostentatiously expensive. "To mark his first birthday with both of us." Raina nodded, appreciating Grayson's sensitivity. This would be the first birthday celebration he'd ever attended for his son, the first of 11 he'd missed. Jonah would love that. "He's been dropping hints about wanting a telescope upgrade." "I was thinking something a bit more significant," Grayson said, a hint of hesitation in his voice. "What would you think about a trip? The three of us. Somewhere Jonah has always wanted to go." "Like where?" He mentioned wanting to see the Grand Canyon. "We could fly out, spend a few days exploring, maybe visit some of the national parks in the area." The suggestion was thoughtful, aligned with Jonah's interests rather than flashy or excessive. Still, Raina felt a flicker of concern. "That sounds wonderful, but I don't want him to expect elaborate gifts or trips for every birthday. Part of what makes him such a great kid is that he appreciates simple things. Values experiences over possessions." "I know," Grayson agreed quickly. "And I respect that. I'm not trying to buy his affection or compensate for lost time with extravagance. I just..." He paused, searching for words. "I want to create a memory. Something the three of us share. A foundation for whatever comes next." The sincerity in his voice, the careful consideration behind the suggestion, eased Raina's concerns. "When you put it that way, it sounds perfect. Jonah will be thrilled." "Good." Grayson smiled, relief evident in his expression. "I'll make the arrangements. Nothing over the top. Just flights, a nice place to stay, maybe a guided tour of the canyon." As they continued discussing details, Raina found herself studying Grayson with new awareness. He'd changed physically in subtle ways over the past few months, his face less tense, his posture less rigid, his smiles coming more frequently and naturally. But the more significant changes were beneath the surface. A gentleness that had always been hidden before, a capacity for joy she'd never witnessed during their earlier relationship, a willingness to be vulnerable that the younger Grayson would have considered weakness. "What?" he asked, catching her scrutiny. "Nothing," she said, then reconsidered. "Actually, I was just thinking about how different you are now. From when we were together before." Grayson nodded, accepting this observation. "I am different. Having Jonah in my life. It's changed my perspective on everything. What matters? What doesn't? Who I want to be. And who is that?" Raina asked softly. "Who does Grayson Vale want to be now?" He considered the question with the thoughtfulness that characterized him at his best. Someone worthy of his son's admiration. Someone who builds things that last, and I don't mean buildings or companies. I mean relationships. Connections. A legacy that matters beyond balance sheets and market valuations. He met her gaze directly. Someone who doesn't make the same mistakes twice. The implication hung between them, neither quite ready to address it directly. Instead, they turned the conversation to safer topics: Jonah's upcoming school year, a community art project Raina was coordinating, the book Grayson was reading about astrophysics so he could better answer Jonah's increasingly complex questions about the universe. It wasn't until they were walking back to where Grayson had parked his car that he broached the subject that had been simmering beneath the surface all evening. "Raina," he began, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "There's something I've been wanting to discuss with you. About us." She felt her pulse quicken. "What about us?" "These past few months, getting to know Jonah, building this co-parenting relationship with you, it's been the most meaningful time of my life." He stopped walking, turned to face her directly. "And I've realized something I think I've always known but was too focused on other things to acknowledge. You are extraordinary. As a mother. As a person. As the woman I never deserved but always admired." Raina felt heat rise in her cheeks, caught off guard by the directness of his words. "Grayson. Please, let me finish," he said gently. "I'm not asking for anything. I'm not presuming anything. I just want you to know that my feelings for you never really went away. They were buried under ambition and ego and misplaced priorities. But they were there. They are there." The confession hung in the warm summer air between them. Raina found herself at a loss for words, a jumble of emotions making it impossible to form a coherent response. "You don't need to say anything," Grayson continued, reading her hesitation. "I understand that I hurt you. That trust, once broken, isn't easily rebuilt. I just wanted to be honest about where I stand. Whatever happens, or doesn't happen, between us, it won't affect my commitment to Jonah or my respect for you as his mother." The assurance was exactly what Raina needed to hear, that Jonah's well-being remained the priority, that her relationship with Grayson as co-parents wasn't contingent on her response to his feelings. "I don't know what to say," she admitted finally. "This is unexpected." "Is it?" Grayson asked, a hint of his old confidence returning. "I thought I'd been rather transparent in my admiration." Raina smiled despite herself. "Maybe I've been deliberately not noticing." "Self-preservation," he acknowledged. "Completely understandable." They resumed walking, a new awareness between them that was both exhilarating and terrifying. At his car, Grayson turned to her once more. "Would you consider having dinner with me again? Not to discuss Jonah's birthday or school plans or co-parenting logistics. Just us. Getting to know each other as the people we are now." The invitation was both simple and profound, a chance to explore what might exist between them beyond their shared love for their son. A potential beginning rather than a revisiting of what had ended 11 years ago. "Yes," Raina said, surprising herself with the lack of hesitation. "I'd like that." The smile that spread across Grayson's face. Genuine, unguarded, almost boyish in its delight, was unlike any expression she'd seen from him during their previous relationship. It was the smile of a man who had discovered something more valuable than corporate success or financial dominance. A man who had learned, however belatedly, what truly mattered. "I'll call you tomorrow," he promised. Then, with a gentleness that made her breath catch, he leaned forward and kissed her cheek. "Good night, Raina." As she watched his car pull away, Raina touched the spot where his lips had brushed her skin. The simple gesture had felt more intimate, more meaningful than any of their past encounters. Because it wasn't based on physical attraction or the excitement of forbidden workplace romance. It was grounded in something deeper, mutual respect, shared purpose, the complex bond of raising a child together. Whether it would lead to something more remained to be seen. But for the first time in 11 years, Raina allowed herself to imagine possibilities beyond the careful boundaries she'd constructed around her heart. Because some doors, once reopened, reveal rooms more beautiful than we remembered. Some truths, once acknowledged, create space for new beginnings. Some mistakes, even those that seem irreparable, can become the foundation for something stronger, wiser, and more enduring than what came before. If this story of second chances and rediscovered connections has resonated with you, please take a moment to like and subscribe. Your support helps us continue sharing narratives that remind us growth is always possible, forgiveness is a gift we give ourselves as much as others, and love, in all its complex forms, remains the most powerful force for transformation in our lives. Jonah's 11th birthday trip to the Grand Canyon exceeded all expectations. For 5 days, they hiked trails, took guided tours, marveled at sunsets that painted the ancient rock formations in shades of gold and crimson. They stayed in a comfortable lodge rather than the luxury accommodations Grayson might once have insisted upon. Ate at casual restaurants where Jonah could order chocolate milk with dinner. Spent evenings playing board games and planning the next day's adventures. They functioned as a family. Not perfect, not without occasional tensions or disagreements, but united in their desire to make the experience special for Jonah. And for each other. The dynamic between Raina and Grayson had shifted subtly since their dinner conversation. Nothing overt, no dramatic declarations or physical displays that might confuse Jonah. But there was a new awareness between them. Lingering glances. Hands that found reasons to touch briefly. Private smiles exchanged over their son's head when he said something particularly endearing. On their final evening, after Jonah had fallen asleep in the adjoining room of their suite, exhausted from a day of exploration, Raina and Grayson sat on the balcony watching stars appear in the desert sky. "Thank you for this," Raina said quietly. "For giving Jonah such a wonderful birthday. For being so thoughtful about what would matter to him." "Thank you for allowing me to be part of it," Grayson replied. "For giving me the chance to know him. To be his father." The simple acknowledgement of what might never have been, of the years nearly lost forever, created a moment of profound connection between them. A shared recognition of how close they'd come to missing this. To Jonah growing up without his father. To Grayson never knowing his son. To this family never having the opportunity to exist. "I've been thinking about what you said," Raina began, her voice soft in the desert night. "About your feelings. About us." Grayson turned toward her, his expression carefully neutral, giving her space to continue without pressure. "I was so hurt when you ended things 11 years ago," she continued. "Not just because I loved you, but because you made it clear that what we had wasn't important enough to fight for. That I would always come second to your ambition." "I was wrong," Grayson said simply. "About what mattered. About what would bring meaning to my life. About everything, really." "I know that now," Raina acknowledged. "I've seen it in how you are with Jonah. How you've rearranged your entire life to be present for him. How you've changed in ways I never thought possible." She paused, gathering courage for what came next. "And I've realized something too. That the feelings I had for you, they never really went away either. They were buried under hurt and resentment and the daily work of raising Jonah alone. But they were there. They are there." The admission hung between them, honest and vulnerable and filled with possibility. "Where does that leave us?" Grayson asked, his voice gentle. "I don't know exactly," Raina admitted. "I know we can't go back to who we were before. Too much has happened. We're different people now. Better people, I hope," Grayson said. "At least, I know I am. Because of Jonah. Because of you." "I think we start slowly," Raina suggested. "See where this leads. Be honest with each other about what we want, what we fear. Put Jonah first, always." "Always," Grayson agreed immediately. "His well-being comes before anything else. And we don't make promises we can't keep," Raina added. "To each other or to him." Grayson nodded, understanding the deeper meaning behind her words. The need for reliability, consistency, proof that his transformation was genuine and lasting. "I can work with those terms," he said, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. May I add one condition of my own? What's that? That we allow ourselves to hope, Grayson said softly. That whatever happens between us, we recognize it as a gift neither of us expected. A second chance we both had to earn. The simplicity and wisdom of his request touched Raina deeply. I think I can manage that. In the quiet that followed, with the vast canyon stretching into darkness beyond their balcony and their son sleeping peacefully nearby, Grayson reached for Raina's hand. She let him take it, their fingers intertwining in a gesture that felt both new and familiar. No dramatic declarations. No promises of forever. Just two people who had found their way back to each other through the unexpected miracle of the child they'd created together. Two people willing to explore what might be possible now that they'd both learned what truly mattered. Two people allowing themselves to hope. When they returned home, life resumed its regular rhythms, but with subtle shifts that reflected their evolving relationship. Date nights became part of their routine, sometimes simple dinners while Jonah stayed with Raina's mother, occasionally more elaborate evenings out when Grayson's schedule allowed. They took things slowly, mindful of Jonah's awareness and the potential impact on him if things didn't work out. But Jonah, far from being confused or concerned, seemed delighted by the development. I knew it, he declared when they finally sat him down to explain that they were seeing each other romantically. I told Mom it would be okay if you liked each other again. His easy acceptance, his obvious happiness at seeing his parents together, eased one of Raina's primary concerns. Still, other challenges remained. Integrating their very different lives. Navigating Grayson's public profile and the inevitable media interest when news of his previously unknown son eventually leaked. Balancing Raina's desire for simplicity with Grayson's instinct to provide abundantly. But they faced these challenges together, with a maturity and mutual respect that had been missing from their earlier relationship. They disagreed sometimes, compromised often, and always kept Jonah's well-being at the center of their decisions. 6 months after the Grand Canyon trip, as autumn painted the city in shades of gold and crimson, Grayson invited Raina to dinner at a small restaurant they discovered together, intimate, unpretentious, with excellent food and no paparazzi lurking outside. I have something I want to discuss with you, he said as they finished their meal. Something important. Raina felt a flutter of anticipation. Their relationship had deepened steadily over the past months, moving from cautious exploration to genuine partnership. They hadn't discussed marriage or living arrangements, both content to let things evolve naturally, but she'd sensed Grayson had been contemplating next steps. I'm listening, she said, smiling at the uncharacteristic nervousness in his expression. I've been offered an opportunity, he began. A significant one. The kind that comes along rarely in a career. Not what she'd been expecting. What kind of opportunity? A government appointment. Advisory role on economic development and financial regulation. Based in Washington. Washington, Raina repeated, processing the implications. That would mean moving. Yes, Grayson confirmed. It would. And you're considering it? I'm discussing it with you, he clarified. Because it doesn't just affect me. It affects us. You and Jonah. Our family. The word family hung between them, simple but profound in its acknowledgement of what they had become. What about Vale Investments? Raina asked. Your company, everything you've built. I've been transitioning leadership responsibilities for months, Grayson explained. The executive team is strong. The company is stable. I'd retain my position as chairman of the board, but step back from day-to-day operations. Raina studied him, trying to reconcile this information with the man she'd known. The one whose identity had been so completely entwined with his company that he'd once chosen it over their relationship. This is a major change, she said carefully. Are you sure it's what you want? What I want, Grayson replied, his gaze steady, is to use what I've learned, what I've built, in service of something larger than my own success. To create policies that might help families like ours. To leave a legacy that Jonah can be proud of. The sincerity in his voice, the clarity of purpose, touched Raina deeply. This wasn't a man chasing the next achievement or seeking greater power. This was someone who had genuinely re-evaluated what mattered, who wanted his work to reflect the values he'd discovered through fatherhood. "I think that's admirable," she said honestly. "But Washington is a big move. For all of us." "I know," Grayson acknowledged. "That's why I wanted to discuss it with you before making any decisions. This isn't like before, Raina. I'm not choosing career over family. I'm asking if we can find a path forward together." The distinction was crucial, and representative of how profoundly their relationship had evolved. 11 years ago, Grayson had announced his move to London as a fait accompli, with the clear expectation that his career took precedence over their connection. Now, he was presenting an opportunity as a question, a possibility to be explored together, with their family's well-being as the priority. What would this mean for Jonah? Raina asked. "New school, new friends, new everything. I've researched schools in the area," Grayson said, unsurprisingly prepared. "There are excellent options. And the Smithsonian Museums, the National Air and Space Museum, he'd have incredible resources for his interests in science and astronomy. And for me?" The question was direct, necessary. "The National Gallery has an education department that would value your experience. The community arts scene is vibrant. Or you could continue freelance work, with more resources to support your own projects." Grayson leaned forward, his expression earnest. "I'm not asking you to give up your career or independence, Raina. I'm asking if we can build something new together." The thoughtfulness of his response, the clear consideration he'd given to her needs and aspirations, reinforced how different this Grayson was from the man who had once dismissed her as a distraction from his ambitions. "When would this happen?" she asked, not yet committing but allowing herself to consider the possibility. "The position would start in January. But there's something else we need to discuss first." Grayson reached into his jacket pocket, withdrew a small velvet box. "Something more important than any job or move." Raina's breath caught as he placed the box on the table between them, not opening it, not making a grand gesture, just presenting it as part of their conversation. "I'm not proposing tonight," he clarified, reading her expression. "At least, not formally. That should happen when we're both ready, when we're certain. But I wanted you to know that's where I hope we're heading. That I see my future with you and Jonah, wherever that takes us." The approach was quintessentially Grayson in its thoughtfulness, giving her the security of knowing his intentions while respecting her need for autonomy in the decision. Not pressuring, not assuming, but offering a vision of possibility. "May I?" Raina asked, gesturing toward the box. Grayson nodded. She opened it carefully to reveal a ring that took her breath away, not because of its obvious value, though the diamond was certainly significant, but because of its design. The stone was set in a pattern that resembled a constellation, with smaller diamonds creating a formation she recognized immediately. "Cassiopeia," she whispered. "Jonah's favorite constellation." "The first one he showed me through his telescope," Grayson confirmed. "I had it custom designed. To represent what brought us back together. Who made us a family." The thoughtfulness of the gesture, incorporating their son into this symbol of their relationship, moved Raina deeply. This wasn't just about the two of them finding their way back to each other. It was about the three of them creating something new together. "It's beautiful," she said softly, closing the box and returning it to him. "And I appreciate how you're approaching this. Giving us time. Making sure we're both certain. We've rushed important decisions before," Grayson said. "I don't want to make that mistake again. Washington, marriage, our future. These are choices we should make together, with complete clarity about what we want." Raina nodded, grateful for his patience, his willingness to move at a pace that felt right for both of them. "I need to talk with Jonah about Washington. See how he feels about moving. He has friends here, routines, a life he's comfortable in. Of course, Grayson agreed immediately. His feelings should be part of our decision. And if the timing isn't right, if you both aren't ready for such a significant change, I'll decline the position. There will be other opportunities. The simple statement, the clear prioritization of their family over his career ambitions, confirmed everything Raina needed to know about the man Grayson had become. Let's talk with him together, she suggested. This weekend. See what he thinks. Jonah's reaction to the potential move surprised both of them. Rather than resistance or anxiety, he showed immediate enthusiasm. Washington? Like where the president lives? And all those museums? His eyes widened with excitement. Would we live in the White House? Grayson laughed. Not quite. I'd be working with the government, not running it. But we would live in a nice house, probably in Virginia or Maryland just outside the city. Would we all live together? Jonah asked, looking between his parents. Like, as a real family? The directness of the question created a moment of silent communication between Raina and Grayson, a recognition of how perceptive their son was, how aware of the evolving relationship between them. That's something your mother and I are discussing, Grayson answered carefully. If we decide to move to Washington, yes, I think living together would make the most sense. But we want to make sure everyone is comfortable with that arrangement. Jonah nodded, processing this information. I think it would be good. Being a real family. In a new place where we could all start together. The simple wisdom in his perspective, the recognition that a new location might offer them all a fresh beginning, unburdened by the separate lives they'd established in this city, struck both parents deeply. What about your friends here? Raina asked. Your school. Your soccer team. You'd be leaving a lot behind. Jonah considered this seriously. I'd miss my friends. But we could visit, right? And I could make new friends. And if we're all together. He shrugged, the gesture remarkably similar to one Grayson often made. That's the most important thing. His certainty, his clear prioritization of their family unity over other considerations, settled something in Raina's heart. If Jonah could approach this potential change with such openness and optimism, perhaps she could do the same. The decision wasn't made that day. Or the next. They took their time, discussing logistics, visiting Washington to explore neighborhoods and schools, considering what such a move would mean for each of them individually and as a family. Through it all, Grayson remained patient, never pressuring, always clear that their collective well-being mattered more than any career opportunity. And Raina found herself increasingly drawn to the possibility, not just of the move itself, but of the new beginning it represented. A chance to build something intentional together, rather than trying to integrate their separate lives in a city filled with the echoes of their past. 3 weeks after Grayson's initial proposal, as they sat in their favorite pizza restaurant, the one where they'd had their first meal together after reuniting, Raina made her decision. Yes, she said simply. Grayson looked up from his menu. Yes to Washington. To moving forward together. To seeing where this journey takes us. The smile that spread across his face, genuine, unguarded, filled with hope, was answer enough. But his words, when they came, held a promise that meant everything. I won't let you down, he said quietly. Either of you. Not this time. I know, Raina replied. And she did know, with a certainty that would have seemed impossible a year ago. Because the man sitting across from her wasn't the Grayson Vale who had once chosen ambition over love. He was someone new. Someone transformed by fatherhood, by second chances, by the recognition of what truly mattered. Someone who had learned, however belatedly, that the most important merger wasn't between corporations but between hearts. That the most valuable acquisition wasn't measured in market share but in moments shared. That the true legacy wasn't built in glass towers but in the eyes of a child who carried your features and your hopes into the future. When they told Jonah their decision, his excitement was immediate and contagious. He began researching Washington attractions, planning weekend explorations, imagining their new life together with the boundless optimism of childhood. The practical arrangements followed, Grayson accepting the position, Raina giving notice at the Community Arts Center, realtors engaged to sell her townhouse and find them a suitable home in the Washington area. The news of Grayson Vale's government appointment made headlines in financial publications, with speculation about what it meant for Vale investments and the broader market. But the more significant news, that the notoriously private billionaire had an 11-year-old son and was relocating his family to Washington, created a different kind of media interest. Photographers appeared outside Raina's townhouse. Reporters called with questions about their relationship, Jonah's existence, the years of separation. They weathered the intrusion together, protecting Jonah from the worst of it, presenting a united front to the world. Grayson's PR team issued a simple statement acknowledging his son and requesting privacy for their family during this transition. Most reputable outlets respected the boundary, focusing on the professional implications of Grayson's new role rather than the personal story behind it. As their departure date approached, as boxes filled their respective homes and plans solidified for their new beginning, Raina found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this point. The young analyst she had been, falling for her brilliant but driven CEO. The single mother she had become, building a life of quiet dignity for her son. The woman she was now, stronger, wiser, open to possibilities she had once thought forever closed. And Grayson, transformed from the ruthlessly ambitious executive who had once dismissed their relationship as a distraction to the man who now placed family above all else. Who had learned, through the unexpected gift of fatherhood, what success truly meant. The night before their move, after Jonah had finally fallen asleep amid the excitement of their impending journey, Grayson and Raina stood in her nearly empty living room, surrounded by packed boxes and the echoes of the life she had built here. "Are you having second thoughts?" Grayson asked, noting her pensive expression. "Not second thoughts," Raina clarified. "Just, reflections. On everything that's brought us to this moment. How different things might have been if I'd made different choices 11 years ago. If you'd told me about the pregnancy," Grayson acknowledged, understanding her meaning. "Yes. Or if you'd prioritized our relationship over your London move." She shook her head, not accusatory but thoughtful. So many turning points. So many paths not taken. "Do you regret it?" Grayson asked quietly. "Keeping Jonah from me for those years?" It was a question they'd circled but never addressed directly. The elephant that had lingered in the room of their reconciliation. "I regret that Jonah didn't have his father in his life from the beginning," Raina said carefully. "I regret that you missed his early years. But I don't know if I regret the decision itself, given what I knew then, who we both were." She paused, considering her next words. "Maybe we needed those years apart. Maybe you needed to achieve everything you thought you wanted, to discover it wasn't enough. Maybe I needed to build a life on my own terms, to find my strength. Maybe we both needed to become the people we are now before we could truly appreciate what we might have together." Grayson nodded, accepting her perspective without defensiveness. "And now? Are you ready for what comes next?" In answer, Raina reached into her pocket and withdrew the velvet box he had given her weeks ago. The one containing the constellation ring she had admired but returned, not yet ready to accept what it represented. "I found this in your jacket when I was doing laundry last week," she explained, opening the box to reveal the ring nestled inside. "You've been carrying it with you." "Every day," Grayson confirmed. "Waiting for the right moment. For when we were both ready." Raina removed the ring from its velvet nest, held it between them in the soft light of the nearly empty room. "I think I'm ready now." The words hung between them, filled with meaning beyond the simple statement. Ready not just for an engagement or a move or a new beginning. Ready to trust again. To believe in second chances. To embrace the family they had created, however unconventionally. Grayson took the ring from her fingers, his expression solemn yet filled with hope. "Raina Carter, will you marry me?" Not because of Jonah, though he's the miracle that brought us back together. Not because it's practical or expected or the next logical step. But because I love you, the woman you were when we first met, the mother you became in my absence, the partner you are to me now. The proposal was everything their relationship had become, thoughtful, honest, grounded in reality yet open to possibility. Yes, Raina said simply. I will. As Grayson slipped the ring onto her finger, the constellation of diamonds catching the light like stars in a private sky. Raina felt the completion of a circle that had begun 11 years ago. Not a perfect circle, not without detours and broken places and paths that had diverged only to reconnect in unexpected ways. But a circle nonetheless. A journey that had brought them back to each other, wiser and more appreciative of what they had nearly lost forever. The next morning, as they loaded the last of their belongings into the moving truck, as Jonah bounced with excitement about their new adventure, as they prepared to leave behind the separate lives they had built and step into a future they would create together, Raina caught Grayson watching her with an expression of wonder. What? She asked, smiling at his intensity. Just thinking about time capsules, he replied cryptically. Time capsules. How sometimes the most important truths get buried, waiting for the right moment to be discovered. He glanced at Jonah, then back at Raina, his expression filled with gratitude. How sometimes what seems like an ending is actually just the beginning of a better story. As they drove away from the city where their journey had begun, toward the future they would build together, Raina reflected on the wisdom in Grayson's observation. Because some truths, no matter how long they remain hidden, are meant to be found. Some families, no matter how unconventionally they form, are meant to be together. And some love stories, even those interrupted by years of silence and separation, are meant to find their way to completion. Not in spite of the detours and difficulties, but because of them. Because it's often the hardest journeys that lead us to the most meaningful destinations. The most painful separations that teach us to truly value connection. The most unexpected discoveries that reveal what matters most. For Raina, Grayson, and Jonah, a family created through both choice and chance, through mistakes and forgiveness, through a time capsule letter that opened doors long thought permanently closed, the journey was just beginning. And this time, they would walk it together. If this story of truth, redemption, and second chances has touched your heart, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and share. Your support helps us continue bringing stories that remind us it's never too late to right a wrong, to heal a wound, to build a bridge where once there was only distance. Because sometimes, the most beautiful chapters of our lives begin after we think the story is already written.